Hello, before we start unwrapping the week this week, I just want to let you know about The Week magazine. It is a digest of the best news, reviews and columns from more than 200 UK and international sources. Packed with multiple perspectives, it gives you a unique overview of the most important topics and the most entertaining stories. And we've got an offer for you just for being a listener to The Week Unwrapped. Get your first 12 issues for £12 and a free Moleskine notebook too. Go to theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the promo code POD12 to get it. That's theweek.co.uk/offer and the promo code POD12. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday the 14th of March, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen coronavirus labelled a pandemic by the World Health Organization, Harvey Weinstein sentenced to 23 years in jail, and Chancellor Rishi Sunak pledging £175 billion worth of infrastructure in his first budget. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team, it's Gabriel Power. From Money Week, we have John Stepek. And from the Week US, Jessica Hullinger, who is recording remotely today. The sign of things to come, no doubt. How are you feeling, Jess?
I feel pretty good, thank you. I think just a cold, but can never be too safe.
A tactical isolation, and we all look forward to following the soap opera in the next few weeks. John, you're up first. Given that the rules of the show prevent you from selecting anything obvious like the cut in interest rates or the budget, this will be interesting. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Cheap oil isn't always a good thing.
There was already uncertainty with regards to global oil demand, and now, over the weekend, the Saudis and the Russians created uncertainty with regards to actually increasing supply when everybody thought they were going to decrease supply.
This led to the biggest sell-off since 1991, when the U.S. went into Kuwait and met little resistance from Saddam Hussein and his troops. Events in Vienna played out like a family fight that spilled right out into the open for observers to see. 3 years of tight collaboration between Vladimir Putin of Russia and King Salman of Saudi Arabia went right up in smoke after a nasty day of prolonged meetings.
A report from CNN there. John, what were they talking about?
Basically, Saudi Arabia and Russia had a massive falling out over oil production at the end of last week. So to give you some context on this, the oil price crashed in 2014. In 2016, Saudi Arabia, which is the head of OPEC, which is the oil cartel, which is mainly the Gulf producers, teamed up with Russia, which is also a massive oil producer, to cut the supply of oil to the global market in order to prop the price up. Now, what happened in the last couple of weeks is that coronavirus has got everyone worried that we're not going to use as much oil, which is perfectly correct. So the oil price has been falling. Now, what people had expected was that OPEC and Russia would team up and cut production even further in order to prop the oil price up. Instead, what happened is the Saudis said, look, let's slash production by another 1.5 million barrels a day. The Russians said, no chance. There's already too much oil in the market. This is pointless. It's a waste of time. Effectively, they fell out. Now the Saudis have said, we're going to pump as much oil as we can. The Russians have said, we're going to pump as much oil as we can. And in America, you've already got shale producers pumping as much as they can.
It's so bizarre, isn't it? Because, I mean, we talk a lot on this show about the green future and carbon cutting targets and all that sort of thing. And pumping out crude oil is like the exact opposite of everything that we've learned is required at the moment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing to remember with that is that oil is basically a geopolitical tool, and it always has been. And so a lot of this is tied up in the political interests of each of the parties involved. The first thing to remember is that whenever oil prices first crashed in 2014, that was ultimately because the US had become a massive producer, and that's because of fracking and shale oil production. So the original aim then was the Saudis basically declared a price war because they can pump oil at a much lower price and still make a profit than the US shale guys can. So the idea was that if we just live with the pain for a while. We'll put our rivals out of business. It's basically like when a supermarket does a price war.
Yes, it reminds me of the value beans wars.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the loaf of bread. Except on this, Gabriel, it seems to me that the clear winner here would be Russia, wouldn't it? Because they're not so reliant on oil for their economy. I mean, in the US, it isn't an important part of their economy, although obviously it's very an important contributing factor to their economy. And in Saudi Arabia, it's basically entirely their GDP, isn't it? So Russia have the opportunity to say, well, let's just see what happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, you are right in that Russia relies on oil revenue for about 37% of its budget, while Saudi Arabia's closer to about 65%. There's a lot of speculation that they're doing it to kind of get revenge on the US for imposing sanctions on them in recent years, obviously post Crimea invasion and the war in Donbass. The problem is that they do technically stand to lose something, because there's a chance that by getting revenge for the sanctions by damaging shale gas and shale companies in the US, if they send some of them out of business, then other larger companies in the US, shale production companies in the US, will just buy their assets, and then we're back to square one. So I'm not entirely sure if their end game, if this is their end game, will actually work.
How's it gone down in America, Jess?
Yeah, well, you mentioned, Olly, this assumption that it won't impact the U.S. economy that much because we don't rely too much on oil. But I actually don't think that's true. I mean, America is the largest oil producer in the world now. That, it took that title in 2018. I think that it does rely on oil quite heavily. Trump's response has been interesting. He tweeted this sort of rah response about how gas prices are going to go down. And traditionally, that's been, sort of a good sign, with the assumption that people would be able to spend the money that they would be spending on gas elsewhere. But the problem is that, especially now compounded by coronavirus, people are not spending. They're not going to be spending elsewhere. And also the layoffs and the loss in revenue and the huge cost of the decline in the shale industry and the fracking industry, the way that this will impact oil production in America is that there will be lots of money lost. And I don't think that will be balanced out by the fact that people are going to be able to spend more because they're spending less on gas. I think, like I said, especially now with coronavirus and with a potential recession looming, I think this looks kind of bad for the States.
Yeah, I think Jess has hit the nail on the head, because oil production is far more important to the US than it was, even a couple of years ago. And one of the biggest issues is that shale companies don't actually make any money, by and large. And as a result, they're massively in debt to a lot of banks and investors. To an extent, they've been kept propped up by low interest rate environment that we have just now. But the problem is that if they do get driven to bankruptcy, then the risk is that you have an element of a domino effect. I mean, we've already seen financial markets kind of crashing very hard, and that's partly because they were so overvalued going into this. And so Russia, I suspect, is sort of saying that, well, of the three big players here, who can hold out the longest with the least amount of pain? And they've sort of just taken their opportunity to strike because they think the US is more vulnerable than it was back in 2016.
But actually, don't they all take a hit? This isn't good for any oil producer, is it? And therefore, actually, despite what President Trump says in his tweet about we'll all get cheaper fuel, don't know if that'll happen in the UK anyway, not necessarily good for us as consumers either.
No, well, I mean, what I would say from the research that I've done is that I'd say it's a kind of unknown quantity. It's Saudi Arabia and Russia can both tolerate lower oil prices for some time because they have such much stronger balance sheets than they did in 2014, 15, 16. But yeah, it's very difficult to see exactly. It's ending up in a kind of who blinks first situation that I'm not sure anybody really knows the outcome of, especially with the input of the United Arab Emirates this week, who have plunged even more oil into the supply chain. So it's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen, and I'm not sure it's going to end well for anybody, really.
And with the backdrop of coronavirus around the world, Jess, which really needs international cooperation to overcome, this is exactly the wrong kind of trade war to be having, isn't it? We need countries to be working together.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as well, talking about what Gabe was saying, is there an end to this? Like, it's really unfortunate. I think Putin, who isn't known for being particularly cooperative and who has quite a large ego, he's not known for backing down. So, I don't think that he's going to look at coronavirus, or that, any of the other players here are going to look at what's happening with coronavirus and say, okay, well, then we'll all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I think that probably this is this is going to compound a lot of larger problems that are happening kind of all at the same time. And I think it's really like bonkers. And I think it reflects quite badly on how heavily we've invested in the energy industry, and also like how unregulated it is, that it's so easily manipulated by a sort of petulant president. The fact that Russia could basically press a button and say, we're not going to cooperate with this and we're going to tank the entire economy, I think that that's really scary.
Petulant presidents, plural. I mean, Putin at the moment, this is another underreported story of the week, John, has just kind of been given tacit permission to be president of Russia forever, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean, Putin's been doing this for ages, and anyone who kind of has really been thinking that he's not a dictator since, basically for the last decade, has been kidding himself on. I mean, he originally scammed it so that he could circumvent the rules on being president by becoming prime minister.
Yeah. And
now he's kind of like going to scam it to be president for, basically until he's in his 80s.
So they're introducing the Russian parliament, am I right, the idea that only having 2 sequential terms of 6 years each, that will no longer be a requisite?
Yes, basically. There's basically, it's just a cover-up for there being no minimum term, which means that Putin can maintain his kind of place of power until he's the same age as your average, American presidential candidate.
So when we talk about implications for all of us, Jess, is it that? Is it the players involved? Is it the fact that in all likelihood this is further sign of the sort of thing that Putin gets up to, and he's probably going to be around for the next 20 years? Or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really puts Putin's power and his sort of corruption into perspective for the everyday consumer, right? This is going to affect all of our daily lives, whether that's through, gas prices or just generally like our stocks and shares going down. I think everybody's going to feel this, and so it's not. I think this goes beyond just what's happening between governments, and it really has trickle down effect into our daily lives. So yeah, I think this really hammers home what's wrong with Putin and with our relationship to Russia.
And John, from a British domestic point of view, could this impact us in our wallets in other ways? I mean, a lot of pension funds are invested in companies like BP and Shell.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, obviously, it's not bad news for individual consumers because petrol prices will go down. They don't.
Will they? They never do.
They do.
A bit.
You don't notice it mostly, but people who drive more than your average Londoner kind of notice it. But no, as far as stuff like, BP has seen its share price crash to where it was in the wake of the Gulf of Mexico disaster in 2010. So it really has fallen hard. And the thing is, if they're starved of cash, lots of kind of fund managers are dependent on the dividends from BP and Shell, particularly in the UK, to generate income. And it's certainly possible. I mean, they may not cut their dividends, but that is a possibility if this goes on for long enough. And then there's also the impact on interest rates, which is a bit more complicated. But when oil prices fall, interest rates will tend to go lower as well because of the risk of deflation. Long story short, that makes pension deficits bigger. And it makes companies have to spend more money plugging the holes in those pension deficits, which means they've got less money to spend on other things. So, yeah, it can have a slightly more technical but still big deal impact on our pensions.
Yeah, big story generally, actually, and probably one that would have been more widely reported if we weren't having the week we're having. So, John, thank you for that. Jessica, you're up next after this. OK, Jessica, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Is beer losing its buzz?
The non-alcoholic beverage world in total is over $300 billion. The beer world itself is $110 billion. So any piece of that pie that you carve out, there are whole categories the size of like cold brew coffee or coconut water that you could, in theory, add to the beer world.
Right.
And that's really our goal. We're not a soapbox company. We're just looking to add occasions that are healthy to the drinking world and have a positive impact. And that U.S. market, it's not only the traditional non-alcoholic consumer groups, which is small, but it's real. They're great fans and community members. But among Gen Z and millennials, 55% of people, according to Bank of America, 66% according to Nielsen, are looking to reduce their drinking. And that's already with 40% of adults not drinking already. So there's a growing and increasingly portion of the market that the beer world's missing at the moment.
Non-alcoholic brewer Bill Schufelt talking to 3x3 Insights. Why is non-alcoholic beer in the news, Jess?
So this week, Athletic Brewing, which is an American non-alcoholic beer company based out of Connecticut, closed a really big funding round of about $17.5 million. So it raised another round of funding. One of its investors called the non-alcoholic beer market the fastest growing untapped space in all of beverages. And indeed, this sort of reflects sort of a larger trend in the growing popularity of non-alcoholic beer overall. And in the UK, as a sector of the beer market, non or low alcoholic beer, or if you want to be cool, it's called no-low beer, is apparently...
Oh, I didn't know that word. Did you know that word, Gabe?
I actually didn't.
No. John?
No.
No. No to no-low.
I'm not cool.
But this segment is apparently is growing faster now than craft beer. There was a 41% surge in supermarket sales of no-low beer in 2019. And of course, this sort of coincides with a general trend in people drinking less. But I think the more interesting thing is that people are opting for non-alcoholic beer. They're going to a pub or they're going to the supermarket and they're saying, actually, you know, I kind of am craving a non-alcoholic beer. So, you know, is this becoming everybody's new favorite drink? Are we going to start going to the pub and instead of ordering, a pint of lager, are we going to get a no-low beverage?
I mean, I guess that begs the question then whether, when there was a smaller range of non or low alcoholic beers to choose from when one went out for the evening, whether people were opting for soft drinks and the like because that's all there was, and whether they're all along they preferred the taste of beer, or whether there's something else going on here.
Well, I think part of it is that these companies have invested heavily in making non-alcoholic beer actually taste good. So they've made it taste like regular beer. A lot of these drinks are nearly indistinguishable from regular beer, which is kind of amazing. So, maybe if you like the taste of beer but you don't want the effects, or you're not a drinker or whatever, and you actually want the taste, you can go for this. I think the other thing is that they have made it, like a lot of these companies have sort of removed the stigma of not drinking, right? So like you can order a non-alcoholic beer at the bar and it'll come in a bottle that looks almost, again, indistinguishable from a regular bottle of beer. So maybe you won't get quizzed about why you're not drinking. But
right,
I think...
okay, so but that's kind of what I was getting at. That's not really removing the stigma of not drinking, is it, Gabe? That's actually playing into the stigma of not drinking. If people can't tell that you're not drinking. This isn't even just, by the way, about low alcohol beers. This is about, for example, companies like Seedlip, which are non-alcohol spirits. So, I mean, you literally can't tell when you see a glass of that whether someone's got an alcoholic spirit in there or a non-alcoholic spirit.
I mean, that is true. I mean, if you know what you're looking out for, then it's pretty easy to spot. But I'd say that it definitely does play into the stigma, I think. Although there obviously is a rising acceptance with things like Dry January becoming a huge phenomenon. It was already a big phenomenon, but in the last 2 or 3 years, it's become this kind of almost like national, even worldwide phenomenon that loads and loads of people take part in now. So I do think there is a changing attitude towards it, but I agree that it does play into the stigma of not drinking, or that not drinking is to be frowned upon in some way.
There's also this whole concept that drinking any kind of beer might be healthy, John. I mean, I winced slightly when Jess said that we were talking about a beer company, alcoholic or not, that calls itself Athletic.
Well, you can see them sort of like try to sponsor, the Olympics or whatever.
You're laughing, but that's, as I understand it, their business plan. They're hooking up with athletes to be their brand ambassadors. That's what they're going to do.
Well, that's fair enough then. I don't know enough about the kind of...
Well, beer isn't known for making you in great physical condition, I think it's fair to say.
This is true. Well, I suppose it's partly that trendy thing, isn't it, where, it's popular way, as far as I'm aware. The young folk these days aren't drinking as much. And also, I think again, Jess is right in that I sort of am trying to be a bit more sensible about the amount that I drink. And kind of at one of the Christmas lunches that I went to, I had a kind of couple of bottles of craft non-alcoholic beer for the first time. And it was actually, like I said, it was nice enough that I ordered another bottle because it actually did taste like beer. And I could definitely see myself drinking that as a substitute to kind of almost kid myself on that I am having a drink, but that I'm not. So I definitely think the flavour's like a big reason why it's starting to take off, because it is getting to the point where actually this does taste just like beer, and I'm quite keen on beer.
That's interesting that you say that, because for many, many years, non-alcoholic beer was considered by a lot of people, including experts, to be either flavourless or not taste any good. And that's because alcohol in beer acts as a solvent for a number of aromatic compounds within the beer that give it a certain flavour that's very kind of unique to beer. And so only in recent years have breweries, or non-alcoholic breweries, in, I guess, inverted commas, been able to replace that flavour, although it is quite costly to do so and time-consuming. So it's not... It's a less efficient industry now, but I'd say that it's more accurate in terms of recreating the flavour of beer.
Jess?
Yeah, I mean, I think also part of this shift is that there's a rebranding happening. So I think in the past, not drinking or drinking a non-alcoholic beverage was considered a sort of punishment. It was something you did if you were the designated driver, or you were teetotal, or you were pregnant. The rebranding that's happening here within these businesses is they are not going for people who specifically don't want to drink. They're going for people who do want to have a drink, but they want something that's refreshing. So they're targeting people who would be drinking maybe soft drinks, or they're targeting athletes, or people who just want a refreshment. So they're shifting this sort of it's sort of a different segment, right? It's no longer, just beer. It's like a new cool drink that you can have when you're, craving refreshment.
But it isn't healthy, Jess. I mean, this is the thing.
It's
in
healthier.
your country, we've had this with flavoured sugar water over the years, haven't we? The Pepsi Challenge and all of that stuff, and companies innovating zero sugar products and saying, have it like you're on a diet. It's only 1 calorie, but water is better, isn't it? And the danger is, I suppose, that people, like I saw in one of the marketing blurbs for Athletic Beer, that they're saying people are drinking beer 2 days a week, we're going after the other 5 days a week. I mean, if those are 5 days a week where they're not currently drinking beer, it's not best for them to be drinking zero alcohol beer. It would be better if they weren't drinking any kind of, invented beverage at all.
Well, sure, but I think you have to look at this from a business perspective. I mean, if there's a window, they're going to go for it. I agree that it's not any healthier than water, but I think that it's indisputable that drinking something non-alcoholic is better for you than drinking something alcoholic. So I don't necessarily disagree with you that it's not a healthier option. I was talking about this recently with my husband, and he was saying it reminds me a little bit of the meatless burger, right? If it looks the same, if it tastes the same, but is slightly cheaper and it's better for me, why wouldn't I go for it?
More processed food. Gabe?
Well, I also think that, if there are companies that are saying, people drink alcoholic beer for 2 days and we're going for the other 5, it is probably important at that point to look at the broader picture. I mean, we're still, although non-alcoholic and low alcoholic beverages are on the rise, we're still way, way, way off any sort of like parity between that market and regular alcohol. I mean, the beer market globally per year is a $500 billion market, whereas recent studies have shown that the non-alcoholic beer market is looking to hit $25 billion a year by 2024. So if it's a rapidly rising market and it's still only going to get to that level by 2024, then it's not exactly like, meteoric. I wouldn't say that everybody's going to suddenly start switching to non-alcoholic beer anytime soon.
Yeah, and John, we saw this, didn't we, from a business point of view with the craft beer movement. It started as small breweries and distilleries, but then in the end, Diageo and Anheuser-Busch and whoever put out their own versions of those things, and they have the biggest market share because they have the biggest advertising and the biggest distribution. That'll happen with this too, won't it? No and low alcohol beverages will also be the province of Guinness.
I mean, almost certainly. I mean, to be fair, I don't generally see that as a problem because that just indicates that the product has been successful enough for the biggest players to decide, okay, well, we need to push into this. I recognise that there's a sort of is similar to the anti-gentrification sort of argument whereby you have these little craft kind of producers and then they sell out, for big bucks to the likes of Diageo, etc. But really that is a sort of philosophical issue rather than one about, market availability, distribution, all that sort of stuff. And I mean, I think the other point, going back to some of the stuff that Jess was saying about the health aspect is, I mean, you're right, the water is better. But if you go into a pub, I mean, if I go to a pub, I don't want to drink water. I don't want to drink Coke. I don't want to drink soda water and lime. It would be nice if I'm sober that day to have the option. I know that sounds terrible. Yeah, exactly.
If you're intending to be sober when you leave.
That's the one. If it's a sober night, I would rather be able to order something that kind of has an adult-ish flavour, and like when are they going to replace wine as well? Because that would be great.
Jess, final point to you. Why is this your story of the week? Why is this so significant in your view?
Well, because I think it's not long until we start to see non-alcoholic beers on tap at the pub. I really don't think it's going to take very long. I mean, if you look at it, like you're talking about the big companies getting in on this, they already are in on it. I mean, Adnams makes a no-low beer, Heineken, BrewDog, AB InBev, which makes Budweiser, and Hoegaarden says it expects 25% of its beer to be non-alcoholic by 2025. I mean, that's not nothing. And I think that if you look at what these companies are saying, they expect to be in bars and become more mainstream pretty soon. So I think it's not going to be long before, our next team night out, one or two of us are going to be, at some point in the night ordering a pint of non-alcoholic beer. And I think that that's just sort of a lifestyle change that's worth noting.
Okay, I will not look forward to joining you there. Gabriel's up next after this. Gabriel, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The Arctic Ocean has been experiencing a burning sensation down there.
And finally, one of the unique ways that we can transmit chlamydia that we can't with many other sexually transmitted infections is with direct contact. Now, I want to throw a big asterisk over here, because chlamydia can only live outside of a human host for about a few seconds to a minute. So direct contact means something like scratching an infected organ of the body, say part of the genitalia, and then directly touching another part of the body like the eye. This doesn't count for one person touching another person directly and spreading the infection. That's very rare and unlikely to occur.
That's what I love about this show. You literally do not know where you're going next. That was a clip from a video entitled "What is Chlamydia?" from the Khan Academy YouTube channel. Gabriel, he's saying that chlamydia can't live outside the body, but this week there's been a discovery to suggest it can.
Absolutely. Yes, I've brought this to our attention because this week scientists, a team of researchers from across the world, have discovered an unknown species of chlamydia 2 miles below the surface of the Arctic Ocean.
Hold on, species? I thought it was like a bacterial infection you get in your genitals. How's that a species?
Well, there are numerous different strains. There are different versions. There's a larger family group of chlamydia bacteria. And the one that we know as chlamydia is chlamydia trachomatis. It's a specific type of chlamydia. The one that we've discovered this week has kind of stumped scientists because for as long as we've known about chlamydia, any species of it, we've only ever seen it living inside organisms. And it was thought to die within a minute of being outside of, for example, the human body or any other kind of living organism. And so to find it buried in the Arctic seabed in an atmosphere devoid of oxygen and at a very, very low temperature was something of a surprise.
Okay. But what's it in the first place then? Like, it's not an animal, right? What does it look like? How do they just test the water and say, this has got chlamydia?
Well, they were just they were searching for kind of microbial life at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean.
So they've got some pretty powerful microscopes, basically.
Yeah, well, they dug up about 68 sediment samples from the bottom of the Arctic Ocean just to see what was there.
Okay, and they took them back to a lab?
Yep, and 51 of these samples contained chlamydia, so it's everywhere.
I don't understand. Why were they testing for chlamydia in sand from the Arctic? I just don't get that bit.
They were. Looking
I mean, well done them.
Yes, absolutely. They weren't necessarily testing specifically for chlamydia. They were looking at basically the kind of chemical composition of parts of the seabed that we haven't looked at before, or just looking for kind of a general gist of how things are going down there.
Yes, well, how many of us ever are testing specifically for chlamydia? But it's always worth checking out. Jess, do you understand how the Arctic Ocean gets chlamydia?
I can venture to guess. No, and so it seems like this has been there for a really long time. And I think what the researchers are saying is that the fact that they found this here suggests that different strains of chlamydia are much more common than we had initially thought. And the one that affects humans and animals is different than what they found on the floor of the ocean, but they share a sort of common ancestor. And so what the researchers want to do with this is they want to use it to sort of trace the sort of evolution of this bacteria and how it became what it is today. And they also think that because it's so common, it's actually like a key component of the ecosystem on the ocean floor. And so, I mean, that's really interesting. And,
Positive
what does
PR
it mean?
campaign for chlamydia, finally. Yeah. I suppose, John, this could kind of detoxify chlamydia, couldn't it, as a brand? If we find out that it's helping animals in the Arctic.
Well, I was thinking
you just said there are no animals there, but the ecosystem.
I was thinking of launching a non-alcoholic beer called chlamydia. I think the most interesting thing about this actually is the fact that they found it somewhere that's so hostile to life, because this is just one of a number of things that they found in hydrothermal vents deep beneath the sea where life shouldn't be able to exist. And you sort of think to yourself, what does that say? Again, it's one of these things that says, what does that say about life in other places that are thought to be inhospitable? Is there chlamydia on the moon? Is there the clap on Mars? It's like, what else could be out there that we haven't discovered yet?
An alternative intro to the Star Trek theme, I feel. You just hear John's voice as the music swells. Gabe, is there clap on the moon?
I can't tell that, but in the absence of a host organism, the team now suspect that they're as Jess was saying, it might require compounds from other microbes living in the marine sediment, which would be a kind of groundbreaking thing, and it might, give us more details about how the disease became something that we get told about by the NHS rather than living on the ocean floor dormant or whatever. But at the moment, it looks like there's going to be a lot more research that needs to be done because the scientists that discovered it are having trouble recreating the conditions that it was found in the lab because it's so cold and such a high pressure environment and it has no oxygen. It's gonna take a while before we really figure out exactly what to make of this, but it's certainly interesting.
And I guess if you're a marine ecologist, you might be paying a bit more attention to bacteria now.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a surprise to find diseases or human diseases, or certainly close relatives of them, in the seabed, especially in a very inhospitable place like a hydrothermal vent, to be fair, does attract a lot of life. It's where we've discovered some of the world's weirdest creatures. Like all sorts of sea cucumbers and sea slugs and all that sort of stuff. They gather around those sorts of places.
Sea cucumbers with chlamydia.
Well, I don't think it's transferred to them yet.
Right.
But yeah, so it's not a surprise that we found something a bit unusual in the seabed, but particularly around a hydrothermal vent. But
Jess, this is something that might concern you as you self-isolate today. Do you think there's any risk of it spreading?
God, I hope not. I think that
we've got enough to worry about.
I think this is so interesting. Like, I think it also raises a question of funding for scientific research and letting people go and discover stuff like this. I mean, it seems trivial and it's funny in a headline and all that. But what if they could study this and find a link between this, really primitive version of this bacteria and the infection that exists in the public, and they could find a way to connect those two and maybe find a cure or something. Or a treatment or whatever. I think that it raises questions about how much funding we're giving to these scientists and the importance of continuing looking in the depths and in these hidden places for dangerous things.
It does certainly raise questions. I'm not sure that there are answers that we're ever going to remember to read, but it's been entertaining to find out about. As your host organism, I am going to wrap up this edition of The Week Unwrapped there. My thanks to Jess Hullinger and Gabriel Power and John Stepek. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. It is perfectly safe to transmit. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice and hit subscribe. Once it's downloaded onto your phone, you can even take it to the Arctic with you and hear it there. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sarah Miles at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.